Let me take you on a journey to meet the places that bring us together and all those who design them. Let us explore the profound changes that lead us to reimagine the purpose, operations, and organization of commercial real estate. To do so, we will meet all those who make them, without exception, from design to operations, from the architect to property managers, from FMers to service providers, from occupiers to PropTech startups, to imagine what the spaces of tomorrow will look like. Spaces that make sense economically, operationally, and humanly. To understand together the new dimensions of spaces that at last look like us. Welcome to the Spacecraft. Let's discover the spaces of tomorrow with all those who crack them. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The built world never stops evolving, but at some point in time, it takes huge leaps forward, as key disruptions dramatically change the way we conceive, manage, and experience corporate real estate assets. Let's jump into what's next and talk about the disruptions to come. To do so, I'm delighted to be today with Ronen Journo, Senior Managing Director at Hines and a 30 years commercial real estate veteran, who had the opportunity to be at the forefront of these disruptions at Cisco, WeWork, and now Hines. Let's head together to the next leap forward. Welcome aboard the Spacecraft. Hello, Ronen.
Hey, good morning. Lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. And we're delighted to have you with us today. And let's just start very simple. And for those who don't know you already, which I doubt highly, could you briefly introduce yourself?
Okay. So, Julia, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, delighted to be here to share some of my experiences and my thoughts around the world of work and technology. I call myself a workplace practitioner, a real estate person. I've been in the industry for the past 29 years. And my training, my focus, my experiences have always been shaped by looking at the industry through the eyes of the occupier, the demand side of the equation, the people who consume space and services, versus the investor, developer, manager side of the equation, which is where I am today. So I had the good fortune of working for some very interesting companies during this period of time and experienced firsthand a number of really key disruptions that took place in our industry.
Okay, so you mentioned that you have been in some of the key players of the industry on the demand side. So you have worked for Cisco, WeWork, and now Hines. You had the chance really to be at the art of disruption that totally redefined how people work together. For you, what is the next disruption to expect in workplaces?
You ask a great question. During my journey in the last 28, soon 29 years, I've been fortunate enough to experience a number of major disruptions in our industry, in the real estate industry. And I'll be very brief about what I've witnessed firsthand. Back in the mid-90s, a big area of disruption was the development of outsourcing. When companies recognized that providing services in buildings wasn't core to their business, and therefore, can they scope it, can they package it, and can they secure it from a third party that will do it more efficiently and to a higher level of quality. From there on, I moved to a company called DGW that was an architectural consulting practice, research-led, that really developed the concept of activity-based working and new ways of working. They focused on understanding the convergence between the built environment, people, technology, and culture. They developed many workplace strategies and many master plans, but that has made me a lot more sensitive to the fact that you can't look at the built environment in a single dimension. You must think about it holistically. From there on, I was lucky enough to join Cisco. I spent over 20 years there, ended up running the real estate organization. But in Cisco, we were the plumbers of the internet. About 80% of the infrastructure of the internet in the world was Cisco equipment. But more importantly, Cisco was on the forefront of using technology to evolve the industries, evolve the world of work. And what I witnessed there is that whether it was, voice over IP with extension mobility, or whether it was wireless that became safe, whether it was the laptops that we had, whether it was WebEx or telepresence, the impact of using those technologies back in the late 90s, early 2000s, enabled us to work anytime, anywhere, any place, using any device. So we're talking about over 20 years ago, an organization of over 80,000 people was trusted to work anytime, anywhere, any place, using any device. The management practice was there, the ethos was there, people's success was measured on output and collaboration, not on presentism. But the technology was a major enabler. So what did that do? That liberated the person from the desk, the person from the office. And it enabled people at scale to use the portfolio as they needed to produce results. We were not alone. Many other professional services and other tech companies of that era adopted different approaches. Fast forward from there, what happened? Why did I join WeWork, and what was happening with the co-working industry? Well, from about 2002, when the dot-com bubble burst, all the way to the global financial crisis, many large corporations started to pay attention to the cost of real estate. Real estate was the second largest cost on every P&L after salaries. And they said, well, is our real estate cost providing the value we need? Is it in the right location? Is it being used well by the people in our organization? And are they happy? And often the answer was no, no, and no. There was tremendous amount of research and data that indicated most portfolios were operating at about 45 to 55% utilization, which means that tremendous amount of money was being thrown away. All of a sudden, the flex became cooler. WeWork took the concept of Mark Dixon and Regis, which came to life 30 years earlier, and said, well, we're going to make the ability to consume space per day, per hour, per week, per month, cooler, simpler. And we're going to make it fun. We're going to remove the concept of hierarchy. People can wear jeans, people can have a beer, it's beautifully designed, and it has some music. Well, guess what? All the large corporations said, well, we're going to experiment, we're going to pilot, and let's see what it does to our people. So the first round of enterprise companies that went there were the ones who needed to build digital teams, in particular the big banks. And they figured out that they can hire these highly talented technologists in a flex location much easier than asking them to come to Manhattan or come to Canary Wharf or come to La Défense. Okay, that's what happened. It was all about the war for talent. Then it became about flexibility. Oh my God, so if I can hire more easily, I don't need to take a 5-year lease or 10-year lease. I can just take a 3 months or 6 months agreement with a particular operator. So then that whole equation of demand and supply and efficiency, effectiveness, and experience became real. That was a major disruption. And COVID accelerated all of that thinking. COVID took it away from a pilot into mainstream. COVID made entire boards recognize that their approach to work, to real estate, to technology has to evolve. It lasted long enough for people to ask some difficult questions. And some of the difficult questions that the boards of companies were asking themselves is, if our business is now fully digital, fully virtual, and still operating, why do we need this asset that's costing us a lot of money called real estate, and often the second largest spend on every company's P&L after salaries? What's the purpose of that office? And when we get out of the pandemic, how do we want to use this portfolio around the world? how do we want to make sure it's most efficient, most effective, and has the greatest impact and relevance to our business? So, and what we are seeing at the moment is that many companies are doing exactly that. They are optimizing what they don't need. They are focusing on their strategic locations where they wish to be, where they want their people to congregate. They want those locations to represent the brand and the culture, and they're very much focusing on quality. So they're saying, I'm willing to perhaps have less space, but of higher quality, many more amenities, and certainly a building that has a positive impact on its community and on the environment.
That's really interesting in so many points. Actually, it leads me to another question, because you mentioned that we liberating from desk, that the way we actually diversify the portfolio so that it's no longer that much a weight, both financially but also from an organizational standpoint. So let's say we see that the companies are still keeping headquarters and offices, and even so they tend to diversify with more flex, as you mentioned. What should be the new purposes of the last places they keep to themselves? What should be the new purpose of workplaces if it's no longer desk, if it's no longer just sitting around in open spaces?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think there are a lot of, first of all, during COVID and post-COVID, a number of organizations conducted extensive surveys of millions of knowledge workers around the world to understand how they're experiencing work from different locations. Okay, Cushman did a survey, and I think now they have something like 10 million data points. Lisman conducted a survey globally of many corporations. I think now they're at about 1.2 million surveys completed. But those data points led to a very simple conclusion. And the conclusion is that today in the workforce, we have 4 generations of people. And overwhelmingly, whether you are in your 20s, in your 30s, or 40s, or 50s, or older, people want to have choice of how they work and when they work and where they work. And people want to be trusted that they are collaborating in the right way and they're producing work. And therefore, what we're seeing is a tremendous amount of debate about hybrid working and how many days in the week should we expect people to turn to an office or not. I actually think that this conversation about hybrid working is really not the crunch of what we need to focus on. I think the core has to be about management practice and leadership practice and the relationship between an employer and their employees. And recognizing that people want to be trusted and people want to have choice when they turn up to the office to work with others, because technology is enabling them to do it the rest of the time. So with all of that, I'm a firm believer that the office has a really important role in the future of our economies. But the purpose of the office must evolve. It's no longer a destination where people spend 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. It has to be a place that is easily accessible at the best possible location that the company can secure. It has to be of high quality building. It has to be an environment that enhances how people feel. So it needs to be full of amenities and services, and it needs to be well connected into its community. I think a lot of these are not going to be just nice to have. I think they're going to be expectations from the workforce and therefore expectations from employer. What takes place within those locations are a number of things. First of all, that's a place that we can create a sense of belonging to the organization, to our colleagues, to the culture of the organization that we work for. That's a place that the organization can convey their values and their brand to the outside world. It's a place where the workers of a company can meet their ecosystem partners. and their clients. And it's a place where you will see tremendous amount of collaboration. People will be much more intentional about what they do once they come to the office for, let's say, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, or even 4 days a week. It will not be about just putting their head down, concentrating in the room for the full day and writing a report. That they can do somewhere else. It will be a lot more about interactions, maybe learning something together, working together on a particular project, and the connection with others. So in order to enable that, I think we're going to see many offices moving towards what we call a hotelification, where your experience as an employee or as a customer will be number one. And we almost will have to think through from the minute you get on the underground, on the tube, or the metro, or in the car, or in a taxi, and you start your journey to that destination, how you spend your time during that during the day in that destination, and your departure. So I think we're going to see tremendous amount of thought process into mapping the experience of the individual, and then looking at how do we enable the touch points to be as seamless as possible.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's great. I like the idea of mapping our overall experience from the start to the finish, and see all the interactions, because it reminds me also how we tend to be willing to make smart buildings now, but this, what you say, really put at the center of the equation the user and the experience he will have of the building. So when we talk smart building, usually we talk technology at the service maybe of those who operate the building. But if we look reverse and see the technology at the service of the occupants,
Yes.
What do you see, and how do you see tech achieving that goal?
So great. So I think it's an excellent question. So if we believe that that's the purpose of the office, right? A place for people to congregate and collaborate, have a sense of belonging, and it's really about enhancing how we feel about work. I think technology will be used in many different aspects. Okay, let's start with the interaction between the individual and the destination. I'll give you an example. I visited a headquarters of a major investment bank recently. The appointment was scheduled 2 weeks in advance. And as soon as the appointment was scheduled, I received a welcome email confirming the meeting, the participants, the amount of time, and the location. 48 hours before the meeting, I received another email to remind me of the weather conditions and the possible transportation routes I can take to that destination. Also giving me clear instructions on the security procedures into the building, and ensuring that I had absolute clarity as to when to begin my journey, and what to expect. When I actually arrived to the location, once I got through security, the receptionist stood up and welcomed me with my name. Now, that building has hundreds, if not thousands, of visitors a day. And I was puzzled. I said to her, "Wow, is there a facial recognition camera? How did you know it was me?" And she said, "No, we're trained. We're trained to look at all the visitors night before, and we Google you, and we see your face, and we memorize, and standing up and welcoming you in your first name is really important for us." I was blown away. I was thinking, wow, this is incredible. And this is an office building. This is not a 5-star hotel. Now, from there on, once you spend the day in a building, if you're an employee, you would want to interact with the services and the environments in different ways, right? So not only accessibility to different spaces, but also booking meeting rooms, booking private rooms, ordering lunch, perhaps booking a slot at the yoga class in the gym. So there are a lot of experience platforms at the moment that are responding to that need. And in essence, what do? They're closing the gap between the services, the built environment, and the individual. Now, move from that side of the human and the services in the building to the rest of the building. I think that this kind of amenities-rich environments will need to be much more conscious of cost. You don't just create, a hotel office environment and forget cost, right? Service charges and utility costs and running costs are super important. So I think we're going to see many more technologies coming to the front that offer the ability to drive efficiency in the way buildings are managed, in the way buildings are cleaned, in the way buildings are maintained, in the way that we actually understand the quality of the environment we're in. So the quality of the air we breathe, the quality of the light, the quality of sound. And all of these data points will have to be enabled by technologies. And when you take the experience platform plus the core building technologies together, I think that the operators will have a much more holistic view of how to create a wonderful experience, but also an extremely effective and efficient machine. Okay, and so that's why when people talk about PropTech, I get nervous about people who just talk about experience platform. I think we must look at the core of the building, the way we maintain it, the way we clean it, the way we secure it, and all the systems that exist there. Legacy systems and new systems, they all have to be connected. And the operators are managing huge budgets, and the more they can optimize it, the better.
Yeah, that's really great and interesting, because it's true that there's a lot discussed about hospitality management, the way you actually, as you mentioned, turn workplaces into 5,000 hotel experience and services. But that's just about the shiny aspect of it, the one you live it. But it should be enabled by something that you don't see, like the hidden part of the iceberg, which is basically how the building or the place is operated. And there's a lot to be done with technology on that end to optimize. And do you see today this is done mostly by facility managers or workplace managers, and it seems that they tend to have a role that is more toward the users. Do you see any new role to emerge to be able to manage all that technology that optimizes the cost of operating a building? And what would be the new skill set for the people who actually take that place? Because there's not a lot of digital right now in these jobs, I would say. So do you see any evolution there, or maybe externalization? How do you see that working?
Yeah, I think, again, an excellent question. Let's just think about the industry, right? Any particular location, any particular asset, any particular building. Historically, what we have seen and suffered from is a very fragmented supply chain. Okay, the occupier, whether you are a large tech company or pharmaceutical or professional services, you typically have your own facilities management firm working for you, and you control about 75% of the space in any particular building. Okay, and so you're controlling the demise and the systems within your demise space. Okay, what you don't control is what happens outside of that, in the additional 15% of the space, or 25% of the, or 20% of the space, right? You do not control necessarily the elevators, or the car parking spaces, or the shared facilities like the gym and the restaurants. Who controls that? Well, that is often controlled by a facilities management firm that's working for the asset manager or the property manager, who in turn work for an investor. Okay, so in order to achieve the concept that we just described about amenities rich, highly efficient, highly effective location that is financially successful, that is physically successful, in other words, people turn up and it's busy, you need to overcome the fragmentation that exists in the industry, and the fragmentation that exists between all these different stakeholders. Okay, when a tenant controls their own space, they pay for that costs out of their OPEX, right? When a landlord manages a space through operators and facilities management, that a lot of this gets charged back to the service charge. So we're not going to overcome that fragmentation overnight. However, I think that ESG has become a very relevant topic to create a common agenda. So if you look at the cost of utilities, right? There are many efforts by landlords, asset managers, property managers to work together with their clients, with their tenants, to understand how the building consumes energy and how to capture the consumption and manage it and optimize it and understand the data points. So there is a common agenda now to pursue one single direction. In my role here in Hines, we launched a business in Europe called Management Services, which is a business that has been very familiar to the firm for the last 35 years, where we bring the asset management, property management, and the facilities management oversight into a single organization. And the intent is to overcome that fragmentation. The intent is to look at the building, at its services, and at the relationships holistically. And when we do that, when we manage those assets in such a manner, we're able to really focus on what needs to be done as opposed to the tension that exists between different stakeholders. So I don't think the industry will change overnight, but I think ESG has become a great driver for much more dialogue, much more collaboration between the stakeholders. And I think that some of the prop tech technology companies often struggle to appreciate how this fragmentation is an issue, and they struggle to understand who they should sell their solutions to. So who do I sell my solution to? Do I sell it to the tenant, to their facilities manager, or to the asset manager with their property manager with their facilities manager? Where do I sell what? And my answer to them is often, well, it depends what you're solving for. If you can identify what problem you're solving, then we can identify who you need to sell to. And it might be that you need to sell to all 3 or 4 stakeholders, slightly different.
In some occasions, it's a really complex ecosystem, and each stakeholder maybe knows about 1 or 2 of the others, not even knowing how certain things are operated, and that reconnecting all these stakeholders together, and be able also to have common platform to share, because we talk a lot about data, but they need to be unified between all these different stakeholders too, to be able to communicate effectively together and drive optimization. That's certainly great. We are nearing the close of this discussion, so one thing I'd like to ask, I know it's a peculiar exercise, but it's a quick prospective exercise, because as you mentioned, things like this are not happening overnight, may take years, maybe decades for some changes. Where do you see, and maybe if not see, where do you wish workplaces to go in terms of direction and inclusion, maybe in the broader way that our cities are redefined? How do you see that how do you see work and places that enables work in 10 years from now?
I've been a fairly vocal advocate for the concept that the entire built environment is entering an era of human centricity. That irrespective of where you sit, whether you are an investor, a developer, a manager, an asset manager, a property manager, or an occupier, everything we do has to begin with how the built environment and its services impact humans, human experience, human emotions, and our ability to collaborate and be productive. So this is the overarching belief that I hold very dearly. And I think that not only it will become a human-centric era in this industry, but it will be technology-enabled. Technology is enabling us to connect the static with the dynamic. The static being the physical environment, the dynamic being the services and the people. And technology has a really important role to act as that glue in the middle. I think there are other elements, particularly in the world of work, that will evolve. I think management practice will evolve. Managers will become much more comfortable to manage organizations and teams that are more geographically dispersed, using technology and using physical gathering. That's never going to go away. We need to physically get together. So I think that's at the world of work concept that will change. As it pertains to offices, there is tremendous amount of evidence out there already. Okay, there are many headlines in the news in the last several weeks about large corporations optimizing their portfolios and beginning to invest in slightly smaller footprints of higher quality. Okay, smaller buildings, but much higher quality, much more centrally located, much more better served with amenities, and clearly buildings that meet many of the sustainable kind of ESG aspirations that organizations have. So I think the race to quality from a demand side is happening. Okay, and I can tell you as a firm, we're very much there. We believe in offices, but we believe that they will be about quality location, quality asset, quality services, and quality relationships. Okay, we're also going to close the gap between a tenant and the owner. It's no longer going to be, I meet my tenant once a year. This has to be a much, much tighter relationship. Tenants are customers, and therefore they have their own internal customers, right? Every head of real estate has thousands of employees that they consider internal customers. So they're having to adapt to their needs. Therefore, a landlord, an investor, will have to stay very close to those tenants and understand how their needs are changing. So I'm very positive. I'm very optimistic about the future of work, the future of the office, and the future of the built environment. I'm also a follower of Carlos Moreno, Professor Moreno from the Sorbonne, with his paper on the 15-minute city. I do believe that when you think about human centricity and technology enabled, and you bring it to a city level, we are going to see very intentional steps, like we've seen with Hidalgo in Paris and other mayors, to make the city more livable. How do I ensure that people don't have to spend hours a day commuting or hours a day in a car in order to access places of work, places of culture, education, and services, right? How do I make the city more green? And how do I ensure that urban mobility and transportation is much more seamless and accessible? So I'm a firm believer in the 15-minute city, but I'm also in some way a realist that it's nothing new. Okay, if we go back to Victorian times, that's how people lived and worked in London, right? And in many other European cities, right? It was within close proximity. So in many ways, we're going back in time. That's some thoughts about where this could go next. I think there's some really big questions about suburban business parks. How are these going to evolve and what will become of them? We have a major shortage of housing, in many Western countries. So I think we're going to see some repurposing. I think we're going to see a much more proactive push by the industry to try and repurpose old that is no longer fit for its original purpose.
That's a great perspective. I mean, I do love also the 15-minute city idea, and also a firm believer of this, and creating like a hubs of life where you can actually get rid of the bad part of commuting and not using your time efficiently. That's really a nice perspective. And thanks a lot for sharing all these ideas and thought with us today. We are closing this discussion and actually just like to thank you again for being with us today and getting us some great insights. Thanks a lot, Ronen, for being with us.
Julian, you're very welcome. And if any one of your listeners want to challenge me and continue the discussion, please encourage them to connect on LinkedIn.
I will absolutely do. My only frustration is that this discussion is way too short to be able to actually tackle all the subjects. But I would like it to be like sparkling ideas, sparkling discussions about where all these things are going, because that's definitely a great subject of interest that just don't touch only the work, the way we work, but the way we live and the way we integrate work into the bigger picture of our lives. So thanks a lot for sharing that, and have a nice day, Ronen.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Spacecraft, your weekly podcast about the built world with the perspectives of all those who craft it. If you like this episode and want to make sure not to miss the next ones, feel free to like our LinkedIn page and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. That's all for today. See you next week for the next episode of The Spacecraft.